Hello Year 8 and welcome to the fourth instalment, the fourth tutorial on the English Reformation. Today we're going to be focusing on the dissolution of the monasteries and looking at three reasons why Henry VIII decided he wanted to close the monasteries down. Before we start looking at those reasons, it's important to set in context what the rules of the monasteries were. Now there are a number of different rules, but I'm going to cover some of the main ones here. So let's start with the idea of a monk who lived in a monastery. They were supposed to live as poor people. Supposed to give up all worldly possessions and live a very simple life, and we'll come back to that in a minute. They were not supposed to be married or have any relationships, and if anyone who was poor came to the monastery, they were expected to look after them. If there were any travellers coming by, they were expected to give them shelter and food, and the food they ate themselves should be simple and nothing too extravagant, nothing too expensive, just enough to get by. Also, because they were the educated people within any area, they were the ones who knew how to read and write, they were also expected to help to teach children, usually of the richer nobility in the local area, but nonetheless they were expected to help to teach children. When they slept, they should be sleeping on a thin mattress, again getting rid of all luxury, all comfort, so that they were able to just completely focus their attentions on worshipping God. Again, because they were the educated, because they knew how to read and write, they were also expected to copy out important books for people in the local area. And finally, coming back to this idea of living as a poor person with very few worldly possessions, they were expected to wear simple, rough clothes. So those are the main rules of the monasteries. Now we'll come on to the reasons why Henry really wanted to get rid of the monasteries. The first reason was because of the extension of his power. So Henry VIII, after the break with Rome in 1534, had taken over as leader of the Church of England, but there was a concern that monks remained loyal to the Pope, and because they shut themselves off from the rest of England, Henry felt that it was going to be very difficult for him to control them. So one way of overpowering them and controlling them was just to close the monasteries. So there's reason number one. Reason number two was financial. We know from previous presentations that Henry VIII had spent an awful lot of money on his wars with France, and he knew that the monasteries were, after him, the second largest landowner in the whole of the country. And those areas of land, they didn't just have monasteries on them, they were able to rent them out to be farmed to people who lived in the local area, and they could collect rent on them and tax for the goods that were being grown there. So overall, monasteries were very rich. The final reason, linking back to the rules we looked at the beginning, is that some people accused monks of not living by the rules that they'd set themselves, that they weren't actually doing what they should be doing. Yes, they cut themselves off from the rest of society, but they weren't actually doing their religious duties, and they were lazy, and they were ignoring what they should be doing. So there's reason number three. Just to summarise again then, the three main reasons that Henry had for closing the monasteries were that he felt that they were hard to control, that they were very rich, and they were not following the rules. Now in your next lesson you'll be investigating pieces of evidence to find out which of those three main reasons you think was the reason that Henry really went for. You may have already made your mind up now, but you're going to be basing that decision on the evidence. Just one point on the evidence we just need to be careful of. The investigation into the monasteries was carried out by Henry VIII's chief advisor, a man called Thomas Cromwell. You can see a picture of him there on the right. Now, if you were the chief advisor of Henry VIII, you only ever really survived in your job, and often survived with your life, if you were able to keep him happy. Okay? Some examples of when that did and didn't happen coming up here. The man on the left here is Thomas Wolsey, and in 1530 he fell from power because he was unable to get Henry VIII to divorce from Catherine of Aragon that he so needed. That is what allowed Thomas Cromwell, again here, to rise to power as the king's chief advisor. So one Thomas replaced the other. This one unable to do what the king wanted, unable to make his king happy. This one was able to. And that only lasted until 1540, when unfortunately Thomas Cromwell fell from power, having suggested his marriage to Anne of Cleves. Henry was to marry Anne of Cleves. Thomas Cromwell said it was a good match, that she was beautiful, that it was going to be a strong alliance for Henry and for Anne. Unfortunately, Henry did not take well to Anne of Cleves, and the marriage ended in divorce, and that unfortunately sealed the fate for Thomas Cromwell as well. So just to go back, when we're looking at the evidence, we need to consider Thomas Cromwell, chief advisor, is he going to be completely honest about what he finds when he goes into the monasteries and reports back to Henry VIII? And that's what you need to consider when we're looking at the quality of the evidence we're using next lesson.